Welcome back to the TimCo Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. In this video, we're going to be cleaning up our build from last video, and then I'll be adding to our new Blazor WebAssembly project to the solution. This will be the project that houses our admin portal and our user shopping section as well. It's going to be a progressive web application. It's going to have authentication and all that cool stuff. So for those of you who are subscribers to my Patreon at the $5 per month level or higher, head over to get the source code for today's video. Now, for those of you who are new to this project, welcome. If you're just interested in the topic this video covers, I think you'll get a great introduction into a real world setting for this topic. Now, if you'd like to start the course from the beginning, there is a link in the description for the full playlist in order. Now, there's also links down there for the phase 1 and phase 2 courses if you want to get up to speed faster, and like the source code for each step, as well as the downloadable videos in those courses. Plus we also have certificate of completions for those courses and tracking for what you've completed. So that's what you can get with those courses, or you can just use it free on the playlist instead. Okay? So let's head on over to Visual Studio. Now, when we left last time, we had made some changes to our project to bring up to .NET 5. So our desktop UI project is now a .NET 5 project. However, one of the things that we added was a Nuget package, this one right here, which is actually a release candidate version, and it's version 4.0.158-RC. The problem is that's not on Nuget.org. The latest version on Nuget does not yet support .NET 5. This is from the This is from the private just to Caliburn Micro, I guess you could say. It's still public, but it's not part of the overall Nuget feed. It's on MyGit instead. And that's what has the latest and greatest cutting edge Caliburn Micro builds. So those builds are still a little slow to get to Nuget because they're still working through the bugs and the kinks and making sure they have everything working before they move it over. So we're using the cutting edge stuff, which can be good or can be bad. And we've found that for our case, it's fine. But that does mean that we have to have a link to that MyGit feed, not just Nuget.org. That worked fine in development, but when we went to our Azure DevOps, we go to our pipelines, we'll see that our latest integration build is failing. And the reason why is because of that missing package. So if we go in here and we look, it says Nuget, don't start that. Nuget command failed at exit code of 1. The not compatible with .NET 5, well, that's interesting, and a restore didn't work, okay? So right there is one of our errors. So one of our errors is that this entity framework core is for 3.1.1, not .NET 5 compatible. And then the other is right down here, unable to find package caliburn.micro with that version, okay? So those two errors are problems for us. So we're going to work on fixing those first. They should be pretty quick fixes. The first one is that we're going to go in and look at all of our packages in all of our projects, kind of do a review to see if we need to do some upgrades. So let's go to dependencies on this one first and uncheck the pre-release and look for updates. And sure enough, we have some updates. AutoMapper, that's a major version change. I'm not going to touch that. But these two go from 3.1.9 to 5.0 for Microsoft extensions. So let's go ahead and upgrade those. Now we have 6 warnings, but no errors. So that should be good so far. We're going to do a full rebuild after this is done. Now let's go and look at our library, which shouldn't have any major problem staying right where it's at because it is a .NET standard, but we'll still look. And sure enough, there are some updates, but this is a .NET standard project. I'm not sure if that'll cause a problem or not. Let's upgrade because it is a Microsoft for both of those. and we're going to see if this causes any problems, okay? So the nice thing here is you may say, well, man, you're really rushing into this. Are you sure this is all going to work? No, I'm not. I have not pre-tested this, but I'm using Git. And because I'm using Git, I can try things out with abandon, because if things don't work, I just roll back the changes and I start over where I started at the beginning of this video. So I can be pretty aggressive in trying out things to see if we can get something that works the way we want it to. Okay, there's a lot to change here. So this is our API, and these are all Microsoft and Swashbuckle packages. Now, version 6 there is interesting because Swashbuckle package, it's a major update from 5 to 6. Still depends on .NET Standard version 2.0 though, which should be okay. So I'm going to upgrade all of these since it's not a third-party libraries except for Swashbuckle, which is kind of, it's still being shepherded by Microsoft stuff, and they say they can upgrade just fine. So we're going to do this upgrade and accept. Since it said .NET Standard 2.0, .NET Standard works with both .NET Core 3.1 and .NET 5 and even .NET Framework. So having that there is very nice because it gives us some flexibility. Let's go to our library. Whoops, let's go into our actual library and go to dependencies. That makes it easier to find the NuGet packages. Go to updates. Dapper. I am not going to upgrade to Dapper 2.0. There is some changes there that I'm not sure if there are any breaking changes or not, so I'll leave it alone. But the Microsoft packages, I will upgrade. And again, I am on .NET Standard, so I don't have to, but I will. And the system.data.sql client, that's a minor update, so I will upgrade that as well. Okay, so I've made those changes. I'm going to do a clean solution, which technically a rebuild does. I like to clean the solution first anyways, and then do a rebuild. It's just kind of a habit of mine. You don't have to, you can just do a rebuild. But every once in a while, I think that there's a quirk or two that causes the clean to be a little bit better. Okay, so they're all built just fine. If we start this up, it should be that it starts just fine. The API started just fine. Our WPF project started. And if we dive into it, yes, we can add things to the cart, remove things from the cart. Well, let's add quantity, remove things from the cart. All still works. So yeah, I think we're going to count that as a win. We can see the roles and all the rest. So we'll call that good. Okay, so that should take care of the Entity Framework core issue. We're going to do a build to make sure of that. And we may also have to check our build agent as well, because our build agent may be using .NET Core 3 instead of .NET 5. So we'll have to check that out and make sure. But then we also have to address this issue of Caliburn Micro and the fact that that version's not there. So what we're going to do is we're going to add to our, let's add it to our desktop UI project. We're going to add a new file. New item. And we want to add a config item. Let's see if we have, doesn't look like we have the Nuget.config that I want. Application configuration, so we're going to call this Nuget. Okay, hit add. And this is now a configuration file. And what this will do is will allow us to specify Nuget feeds. So in here, I want to say package sources. Inside this, I want to say add key equals, we're going to call this just Nuget.org as a standard. And the value equals, we're going to give the path, which I don't have right yet. That's okay. And we'll close that tag out. We'll add one more. Key equals Caliburn Micro, MyGit. And the value equals, we don't have that path yet either. So these are just specifying where the feeds are. You can give it whatever name you want for the key, but the value needs to be the path for your NuGet feed. So for Nuget.org, we already have that. Let's go to dependencies, manage NuGet packages. This is a quick way to get there. And you see the package source up here where it says Nuget and Microsoft Visual Studio offline packages. Well, if you click the gear icon, you can modify these. So Nuget.org is this path right here. So I copy that. And notice this is in the options menu under Nuget Package Manager, package sources. So you can get there through tools, options, and diving down. I just find it's easier to go in under the right click menu. So with that feed, I can come back over here and paste that in right there. That's the feed from Microsoft. That's the standard Nuget feed that we're all used to using. But we also have this Caliburn micro feed, which I happen to have, and I copy that from over my other screen and paste it in here. Now this is provided by Caliburn Micro. They said this is our private, or our personal, I guess you could say, their personal MyGet feed. And so we're gonna paste that in there. And that will allow, when we run this, it will allow the system to pull from both locations. Okay, so it's gonna pull from both Nuget.org and Caliburn Micro MyGet. Okay, so we're gonna save that and we're gonna check that into source control. Okay, so there's all of our changes that we've made. The cool thing here is, even if this were to somehow still break the build, even if we find out later that man, I screwed something up when I did all those upgrades, even though I'm doing a commit, I can always roll back this particular commit and take out these changes. So don't feel like you're even stuck once you've committed something. But I'm going to stage all of these. Now, since they're all being staged, I could have left it alone and it would have assumed everything gets staged, but I like to specify what gets staged just to make sure that if there's anything in there I don't want staged, that it gets removed, okay? So you could right click and say unstage, and then that wouldn't get committed. Okay, let's upgraded NuGet, or upgrade NuGet packages and feed. Upgrades the Microsoft NuGet packages to be .NET 5. Also adds the NuGet.config file for the private or personal MyGet feed. Commit staged. And now I'm going to do a fetch to see if there's anything that's going to be incoming first. You always do your merges locally. So by fetching, I'm checking to see if there's anything to merge locally first, and there's not. So now I hit push to push those changes up to the cloud, up to Azure DevOps. And we get in here, now we see that we've got a build that just kicked off. And we'll see, I think that I have to still modify this pipeline because I didn't specify what feed to use. I'm not sure it's gonna read from that NuGet.config file automatically, or if I have to specify it. I think I have to specify it. So we'll watch this and see if it works. We just did a checkout, so now here's grabbing the latest version of NuGet, and now we're starting to do the restore. This is where we're gonna bomb out, but we'll see. And yes, it did bomb out, but not quite the way I expected to, which is usually the case. So this error here, it says errored right here, in this red line says package Microsoft Entity Framework Core.SQL Server version 5.0.3 is not compatible with .NET 5.0 or .NET 5. The package supports .NET Standard 2.1. Well, we're using .NET Standard 2.0. So we need to make that modification and get to .NET Standard 2.1. which will exclude us from working with .NET Framework anymore. We can still work with .NET Core 3.1 and .NET 5, as well as Xamarin. But we can't work with .NET Framework anymore, which is fine. We're fully past that in our upgrade process. And it says the same thing down here as well for Net Standard 2.1. It also said unable to find package for Caliburn Micro. Okay, so let's go back to this job and make a modification first. We're going to go to Pipelines, click on the job itself and say Edit, and come down here and Nuget Restore. And well, first let's look at the agent and make sure that that we're running 2019, which I believe should have Net 5, shouldn't be a problem. So Nuget Restore right here. The feeds to use, the feeds I selected here, or feeds in my NuGet.config file. And where is that file? That file is right here. Okay, so those feeds. Now, we don't need any credentials for feeds outside the organization because we don't have to worry with that. It's a public feed. So that should work. We're going to save this, but not queue it, because we also know we have a problem with our Net Core library. So let's go back to Pipelines and highlight this. And then we're going to go back to our TimCo Retail Manager and make one more change, and that is to bump up the versions here for Net Core or Net Standard to Net Standard 2.1 for that one. And also for the API, we'll move to Net Standard 2.1 and save. That should work just fine. Let's start that up. It's going to launch just fine. So we can shut that back down. But with that, now let's go back and look real quick at the files themselves, just to show you. That's really all it did, is change that 0.0 to 0.1. No other changes necessary. So with that, let's go get changes. We'll take these two changes, we'll stage them, and say bump to Net Core app 2.1. And we'll commit and push, because we know there's no changes on the server in that short period of time that we did make some changes. Okay, with that, this should kick off in just a minute with, there you go, a new build. And we'll watch this build to see if it in fact will work with our Net Core 2.1, and also if it will, or I'm sorry, Net Standard 2.1, and also if it will find our NuGet packages. Okay, so this is the key one we're going to look at is this part right here, to make sure that it finds the right packages. Oh, sorry, NuGet Restore right there. And this takes about 30 seconds. I'll pause the video for you, but I'll come back once this is done, the restore. Okay, this is irritating me. So the package build failed. Now we are using the correct feeds. Notice there's two feeds here, and there's no error in here for Caliburn Micro. But we get this really weird error message. The NuGet command failed the exit code of 1. NU1201 project, the library, so datamanager.library, is not compatible with Net 5.0. It supports Net Standard 2.1, but Net Standard 2.1 supports Net 5.0. So I don't understand why we're getting this message. I'm confused. If you have thoughts as to why this is, I'd love to hear them down in the comments below. But we're going to make a change, one more change, and see if this works. And if not, I'm going to go bang my head against the wall until I figure out what the problem is. So what we can do is, notice this project is Net 5.0 for Target Framework. If we come here and say Net 5.0, we can change this to a .NET 5. Well, that's giving me a, oh, you know what? I think I didn't change this Microsoft.NET SDK. No, that's correct. So I'm not sure why, unless I have to do a rebuild here. but usually can just change this over to .NET Core project without a problem. We'll see if it has a problem now. And it's still yelling, it's saying it's a .NET Standard project. That's interesting because it should be a .NET Core at this point. We're going to figure this out. I think this might need to be a reload. So let's do this. Let's change the other one as well, because this is all it is to change to .NET 5. So .NET 5.0 is the target framework now instead of .NET Standard. So with that, let's restart Visual Studio. So I close it down. I'm going to restart the project. Load it all back in. And once we do, we're going to right click and go to properties. And there we go. So it did find it after all for both of these. And now it says, yeah, it's .NET 5. So the only thing was an IDE refresh essentially that needed to happen because it was .NET 5 just by doing that. So again, we're going to start this up again. I didn't do a full rebuild, but if it runs, then that should be all we need. And of course it does run. If I hit login here, it logs in, we add things to the cart. We can remove things from the cart. So it seems to all be working at least enough that should be fine. So let's go back and get changes. Move to .NET 5. Stage your changes. And this, the reason I'm showing you all this instead of being perfect about this, instead of showing you the outcome where everything looks great and it all works fine, is because this is how real work happens. You think this is a really simple little change, and it really was. It feels like it. But then you actually try and do it, and it takes you 20 minutes to do because you're banging your head against the wall as to why your build server isn't accepting the new changes because it works locally, so why doesn't it work on your machine too? It works on my machine. Well, that's what this is right now. It's working locally. So if this does not work, I'm going to have to investigate if Azure DevOps is having a problem with .NET 5. That's the next thing to look at, is maybe our build server is the problem itself, and maybe it's trying to build a .NET Core 3.1 instead of .NET 5, but I think it's trying to use .NET 5. Because otherwise, I think we have more problems than what we're having right now. So we're going to we're going to try this again. I'm going to pause it here and wait for it to be complete like before. But if this doesn't work, we've got to investigate further into Azure DevOps. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to move on either way after this, and we're going to build our Blazor WebAssembly piece. I want to get that in place. I mean, that's the whole point of this video, really. This was just a quick cleanup that took 20 minutes. But I want to get that in place because we've got a lot of work to do in order to get Blazor WebAssembly up and running. I wanted to do this cleanup and that Blazor WebAssembly at the same time because in the next video, we're going to be adding authentication from our API, and that's a little tricky. So we're going to make sure that we figure out how to do that right. And we have a failure. Excellent. This task has failed 2 times across 2 pipelines run in the last 14 days. Thanks for that. We know. Okay. So desktop UI.library is not compatible with .NET 5.0-Windows. Project supports .NET 5.0. So I think this is a build server problem. I don't think it's an us problem. I think it's a build server problem because yes, the .NET 5.0 does support .NET 5.0-Windows. Windows is just an additional thing that we add on. So it can absolutely support a .NET 5.0 library. And in fact, we're running it. So therefore, yes, it works. So this is definitely something to look into on Azure DevOps. We're going to look into this more in the next video probably. But if we go and look at this pipeline here and go to edit, I'm guessing it has to do with the agent specification here. I'm wondering if the Windows 2019 does not have the latest version of .NET, and if we need to work on getting a different build server. And as I say all that, I have one more thing to try because it says Windows 2019, but I have come across one thing, and that's this this .NET Core task, which we can add, and we can move this up to the top, right up here. And here we can say, I think custom. Oh no, I think this is the wrong one. Let's go back to add again. And if we search for use .NET Core, I think this is the one. So if we move this up one. So use .NET Core SDK and the version number we need to choose. Let's do 5.0.x. Can we do that? I think we can do that. The version number here, yes. So we can do the .x version. So we can just say that version 5.0 point whatever, whatever the latest version is, use that. So let's save and queue this because I'm a glutton for punishment. And what's one more failing build? I really hate seeing failing builds. So if I can fix it, I keep poking at it until I fix it. But sometimes if it's just not working, then you need to step away and come back to it. But we're going to try this and we'll see how it works. And nope, that didn't work again. But now I have another theory. We're not going to try it because this has gone on long enough and you don't need to see me keep poking at this. But my next theory is the fact that this Nuget restore here is not using a .NET restore. And I'm wondering if that's the issue there, because this shouldn't be making a judgment call here. This should be just working. So we do have the option, if we go to this pipeline, instead of doing the Nuget restore like this, we can do a .NET Nuget restore. Notice in the .NET you can have in here is Nuget push. We don't want that. We can do a restore right here. So I think that's the next step, but we're gonna pause it right there. We're not gonna keep going. Like I said, down in the comments, let me know if you think I'm on the right track. I think that's the issue, but we're gonna stop right there with messing with this. We have fixed the Caliburn micro issue. We just now have an issue with .NET 5 in general on the build server. Like I said, I think that will fix it. We'll see. In the meantime, let's go back over here to our solution, and we need to add, I think, another folder here. Because we have the API, we have our WPF project, we have our database project, and our solution items, which is just the roadmap. But I think we need one more folder at least, and this folder could be called, I think we'll call it Blazor let's call it Web Apps. Call it Web Apps, because we may have more than one. But for now, we're gonna start with our Blazor WebAssembly project. But we call this Blazor WebAssembly or Blazor projects, then the issue is that we have a folder for one project, and that doesn't seem like it's very useful. So we'll still have one project in here for now, but eventually may have more than that. So let's right click and say add new project. And we're gonna choose a Blazor application. And we give this a name. Now it's always good to review. I'm gonna close this out. It's always good to review what you got for names. TRM API, TRM Data Manager.library, TRM Desktop UI, TRM Desktop UI.library. I hate that naming convention. It kind of worked, but at the same time, I hate it. So let's talk about if we name this differently, because this is going to be our both our admin portal and potentially our shopping portal as well, unless we decide to separate the two, but I don't think we're going to. I don't think there's a reason to. So this could be, TRM Blazor, or this could be, that doesn't describe what it does. This could be TRM portal, which kind of works. Maybe call it TRM portal and call it good. We could skip the TRM naming convention and just call it portal. That might work. So the question is, do we stick with naming conventions because that's the way the rest of the system does it? Or do we say, yeah, but we kind of want to change those conventions, so let's go in a slightly different direction? And I think I kind of want to go in a different direction here. I want to start going towards a more simplistic but clear name. So I kind of like Portal. So this is going to be a portal for all the TimCo Retail Manager application. So let's call it Portal. And for product type, we've got our server, or we have WebAssembly. Now, in a lot of ways, this is a fairly easy choice because the benefit of server is that you have that web application that sits on both sides of the line. You have it sits on the server side, and it has the server side benefits of compiling your code, and your code never goes to the client. Your client never sees C# code, and you can have secrets right in Blazor server because they never go to the client. And it's compiled on the server, which is faster, but yet it's also compiled on the client side as well to give that rich UI that the users have come to expect and like, that Angular does and React and Vue, but yet it's still a C# application. So it kind of sits on the middle ground there and does both and gives you the benefits of both server side and client side. But we already have an API for our backend code. So we already have an API to handle all of the security stuff and the business logic and all the rest. We need just a user interface. And so Blazor WebAssembly gives us some benefits here that Blazor Server doesn't. Blazor WebAssembly can work offline. Now, it's a fully client-side application, which is how it can work offline, but that does mean that it's going to have more of an initial download to the client than if we were on Blazor Server. It's not much. It's slower to start than a Blazor Server application is, but the benefit here is that once you've got the application downloaded, then you're just transferring the data itself, which isn't quite as efficient as the SignalR connection for Blazor Server, but at the same time, it's very efficient. But it can also do things like caching data and working offline. That's pretty cool. And so since we already have that API to support it, I'm going to choose Blazor WebAssembly to get that offline access, to get that progressive web application access. So we're going to choose Blazor WebAssembly. Now for authentication, I'm going to say none. This would add authentication as if we were going to connect to a ASP.NET Core hosted application. We're not going to do that. We're going to not roll our own authentication. We're going to set up Microsoft authentication, but connected to a custom API, not to one pre-built for us. So we're going to leave it alone. We are going to say HTTPS, yes. And we're not going to say ASP.NET Core hosted. Okay, it's a really small checkbox. We're not going to say hosted. What this hosted is it creates an API for you. And then what it does is it launches that API and your Blazor WebAssembly app at the same time. And then your WebAssembly app will connect to that API easily, but it kind of tangles the two together. And we don't need to create an API when we already have one existing. That would be redundant work that we don't want to do. We also don't want to have two different authentication databases. We don't want to try and sync those. We're going to use the one we have, and that's it. That's our API. So therefore, don't check that box. But we are going to check the box for a progressive web application. That's the PWA. And that's going to put in a manifest file and a service worker so that we can have offline access for our application. Now, we're not going to set that up or configure that, at least. Not going to configure it today. We'll configure that in the future once the application's up and running. You can kind of check that box and leave it alone until you're ready to go to production. So you can configure that at any point. We're going to do that later in the process once we have this actually working, and then we'll install on a phone. I might even do a video of it on my phone with offline access, because that's some pretty cool stuff you can do. Now, one quick side note is that by default, PWAs are not enabled for offline access in debug mode. So on your own machine, you can't get it to work offline. That's just, it's a design feature, because if it was not like that, then what would happen is you'd have some refresh problems when you're trying to debug where the latest code wasn't always on there, because that's how offline access works. So just note, offline access does not work on your machine by design, and it's to help you debug faster. So when it comes to debugging offline access, you actually have to deploy it to a phone or something else, but we can show how to do that in the future. Okay, so check that one box, Blazor WebAssembly, .NET 5, and create. This will create our application for us. We're not gonna go much further than this. We're just gonna get our portal up and running and make sure it works. So what we'll do is we will, let's just start just this project. So we're gonna set that as a startup project. So it's just the portal. It's not connected to the API, which we'll have to do, but I just wanna get it to run so we know we have something working. So launching it, and takes a few seconds the first time it loads, but we now have a portal. So hello world, take the survey. No, I don't think so. Notice in the upper right-hand corner, we have the plus button here. We click that and say, do you want to install the app? It's called Portal. Here's where it goes to, and there's the cool little icon for it. You hit install, and that will install as a desktop app. We're not gonna do that today, but that is possible to do. So right now, out of the box, this does not have any kind of authentication system. This does not have a system for log in, log off, protecting certain piece of data. It has just temporary data or dummy data in here. So we're gonna fix all of that, but I want to at least get this set up and going in our project, check it into source control, because I wanna have that portal prepped and ready for next time when we add authentication. Now, there's one other thing I wanna do while we are in here. Because this portal is a web application, and because it's going to operate on a different URL than our API, we need to modify our API. In fact, we need to go to startup here. And in configure services, we need to modify this to allow what's called CORS, which is a cross-origin requests. So what that means is a request from one URL to a different URL. Now, for right now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna allow requests from any URL and say any URL can talk to our API, which may sound like, the default thing that should happen, but there is some things that you might want to think about when it comes to, do you allow certain APIs or certain websites to talk to your API or not? But CORS is not really a security thing. It's just not, because you can get around CORS very easily. So don't think of it as a security service. So we're going to turn it off though, so it can work across any URL. That way we can just make sure that in testing it works, and also when we publish to Azure that it works as well. So in our configure services method in the startup.cs file of our API, make sure this is in the API. In here, we want to say services.add CORS. Okay, and we're going to set a policy. We're going to set up a policy. Sometimes IntelliSense gets too smart for its own good. Hit escape. So a policy is going to be that policy.add policy. And we're going to call this our open CORS policy, which is, allow everything basically. And we're going to put comma after that, and we're going to say the options, OPT, and the arrow. And then let's do a new line here, because let's do a couple new lines. Otherwise, it's going to be crowded. We're going to say dot allow, opt dot allow any origin. And then we're going to say a new line dot allow any header. And then a new line dot allow any method. And then we'll close that off with, we need one more paren. So, and then a semicolon too. So what this says is we're going to create a new policy for our course. And the new policy is going to be named Open Cores Policy. And the options are allow any origin, allow any header, and allow any method. So what it's saying is allow from anywhere. So if it's Google tries to access our API, sure, go ahead, you're allowed. If Microsoft.com wants to access our API, sure, go ahead. And just so you know, Cores is only talking about websites accessing your API. This has nothing to do with desktop apps or services. They can access regardless of Cores. Cores does not apply to them. So this is about websites accessing your API, and it can be any. Allow any headers, meaning we're not going to filter which headers are allowed to be in the header. We're going to say, if it doesn't matter what headers you have, go ahead and pass them in. And then finally, allow any method. Now you may think, does that mean any method in my API? Well, yeah, kinda. Because remember, our API is a whole bunch of HTTP verbs. So you got your gets, your posts, you got your puts, and your deletes. Those are the big four. Saying allow any of those. Now you could say only allow get and post. You could do that. Or you could say only allow get and delete, but that's it. Or just get. But we're going to say any method, go ahead and call it, not a problem. Use any of them. Okay? So that's our policy. So we've set it up in our services. That's our dependency injection system to allow cores. But we're not quite done yet. We have to scroll down here and look for the configure method. That was in the configure services method. Now in the configure method, we're going to, right after this, use HTTPS redirection. We're going to say app.use cores, and we need to have that policy name, which I totally forgot by now. It's open cores policy. Yep. Open cores policy. I'm going to copy that. Copy paste your friend here. Paste that in right there. So this is where we use that cores policy. We set it up above, and now we're using it. If you forget this step, you've not actually enabled anything. Okay. So you need to enable it right here. Now I put it right after HTTPS redirection before static files. You could put it after static files. It's not a problem, but it gets a little tricky when you get to use routing and authentication authorization. So put it above use routing. Okay. Some of these do matter in their order. Some of them don't, and you can throw them wherever. But I put things above use routing by default. Okay, so that's our big change for our API so that we can call that from our Blazor app when we're ready. Now, that's not till the next time we do a video on this, because that's when we're going to deal with the issues with the authentication and trying to authenticate against our API. But that way we're all set up for it. Okay, so git changes. We've got a lot of them. I'm going to go up to the top here and just say stage for everything. And then scroll through here to make sure that the list looks right. Don't just stage things to stage things. If you find something you don't want in here or you want to change, then take it out. Okay, but for me, everything looks fine. I think that's all good. So we're going to leave it as is. And we're going to say add Blazor WASM app. Also configured cores on API. And we're going to stage this. We're going to stage it. I want to make one quick change because I hate not knowing why things are working. I'm going to make one quick change to the to Azure DevOps. All right, I made a change. I'm gonna push these up, and I'm going to pause the video here. I'll let you know if it works or not. If it does, I'll show what the change is and why I made it. But if not, then we can wrap things up. And it worked. So I figured it out, which is great. I mean, you know, it's better than not working, I guess. It's just one of those things where you have to bang your head against the desk often enough, and then you figure out what the problem is. So let's go look at this job. I'm going to, I'm going to configure this. So let's go to edit. And look what I did. I took out this Nuget restore because this is the old way of doing things. And so I went now with a .NET restore. So .NET restore, the command is restore. The path of the project is the same as what I use in Nuget. And then down here, still use the same feed in my nuget.config, and I point to that. And that's it. I just changed to that instead of my Nuget restore. And now when it ran, it restored just fine with .NET 5. And let's look at the latest version of this. Let's go to the agent job and look at the restore here. And notice there's a lot more stuff in here, but one of the things it does is SDK version is 5.0.103. That's the latest version of .NET 5. So it is working. It is using the right version of .NET 5. And if you scroll on here, if you want to look, there's some stuff in here, but it all worked. It all restored properly. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of stuff. There's 7,000 lines with 5 warnings. The warnings here looks like the restore target for the SQL project may be missing requirements to restore. And also down here, there's 4 warnings we've had for a long time. In the solution file for the API project, it's got some references to old versions of .NET Framework instead of .NET Core. We gotta investigate that one of these days. It still works, and I'm not sure that they're actually being used in the .NET Framework version, but they're not causing any problems. So you just need to investigate and figure out and figure those out and clean them up. But with that, it did all of our work, including the publishes. So now our API is running properly in the right environment, and it should be kicking off. Yep, there's the Linux release has worked, and now the Windows deployment is in progress. Now, we've added the Blazor project, but have not yet added it to our pipeline, so we'll need to do that at some point. But I'm gonna hold off on doing that until it actually works. There's no reason to deploy an application that is an empty shell, especially since if we're deploying it and accidentally deploy it to production, that would be bad. Because then you have a app in production that's not doing anything. And if people find it, they might think that your site is worthless and never come back to it, even though it's not yet ready. So in order to avoid that, just don't put it in your pipeline. Don't put it in your pipeline until you're ready to actually have it working, at least in dev. And that's what we'll do. This is our dev pipeline. We haven't set up a production pipeline. This is our dev pipeline, and so we're gonna get this running once we have something to run. All right, so we'll modify that in the future. But for now, that's it. So we've banged our head against the desk a few times, but we got our build pipeline to work. So our build pipeline finally does a build, and it makes those changes for our Nuget restore. We did change all of our packages over, upgrade all of our Nuget packages, or most of them, to the latest versions, all the .NET 5 stuff we upgraded in our packages. And we upgraded our class libraries to .NET 5, which means they can now use C#9 code. So that's good. That's actually kind of a bonus there. We also add our Blazor WebAssembly project to our solution. We tested it, that it actually runs as the default solution, or default project. And then we also add the CORS policy to our API so that in the next lesson, when we connect to our authentication server with our API, that we can actually talk to it without any problems. So that's all set up, it's all working, and it's building and deploying. So that's kind of awesome. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you realize this is kind of how real world works. So when you're working on a project and it doesn't work and you're frustrated and you think that, I felt this way, where you feel like, man, I'm just not smart enough. You know what? Maybe that's true, but you're also just like me. Okay. And so if you think that you'd like to be in my shoes someday, then just know you're still going to have those problems. You're still going to come across issues where you just don't know why it doesn't work. And it should work, and you just bang your head against the desk and you can't figure it out, and you keep poking at it. That's the big key here. That's the key that will separate you from being a junior developer and moving up towards a senior developer is not that you don't have problems, because all of us have problems. All of us have issues we come across. Some can be the stupidest thing in the world, even as a senior developer. But the thing that really separates you as you develop is the ability to stick with it. If you can stick with it and not get overly frustrated. Frustration is fine because it happens. I get frustrated at things. I bang my head against the desk. I, get irritated at the project and why don't you work, and all this kind of stuff. But the key is to stick with it, because if you stick with it and if you keep working the problem, you don't just assume things, but you put on your investigative hat and you look at all the different possibilities. That's when you start to see progress. Because the error I knew I had the error with let's pull it up here, with the WPF project, because the WPF project used that Nuget package that I knew was not on Nuget.org. So I knew the solution. And so I'm like, we're just going to fix this real quick. We're going to add a Nuget.config file and we're good to go. And that was my assumption. And when that fell through, I could have gotten stuck on that and say, well, why isn't that working? But I read the error messages. That's critical. Read the error message. And yeah, that was in the error message, but there was also other errors. And honestly, my first thought was, well, maybe they're red herring errors. Maybe they're not really errors. And once I fix the Nuget issue, that'll fix the other problems. And that can be the case sometimes. So fix one problem at a time. But then when that doesn't work, then you got to look at the other problems. And I took it one step at a time. I said, okay, it says it's had a problem with .NET 5. Well, I know that those Nuget packages are out of date. So let's update the Nuget packages. We did that and it didn't work. But honestly, that probably moved us closer to the solution, because yes, those Nuget packages worked in local, but maybe they shouldn't have, or maybe at least they need to be upgraded. And so I upgraded those. It didn't solve a problem, but it doesn't mean it wasn't a valid step. And so after we did that, then we said, okay, well, what else could it be? Well, maybe move to .NET 5 instead of .NET Standard 2.1. So we did that. And then that didn't work, but that's still a valid step. Now, if I didn't want to go to .NET 5, I could have rolled back at that point. But it's fine to go to .NET 5. In fact, there's some benefit there for our project. So I did that. And then when that didn't work, again, I didn't lose my cool. I didn't just walk away and say, this is stupid, I'm going to quit and become a carpenter. Instead, I said, okay, what's next? And it really bugs me when things don't work right, but I've learned to channel that into a investigatory mode where, okay, that's not working. I need to figure out why. And so I focus my frustration, my energy on finding solutions instead of just whining about the problem. So, you have to put your investigative hat on. You look around and say, hey, you know what? In this thing, there's one thing that's different than all the rest. This is different than this. We used to have these steps, these build steps that look like a Visual Studio build step. And this looks like a Nuget step, but now I looked around and say, hey, you know what? They have this use .NET Core which that's going to force us to use .NET 5 because it says .NET 5, but that probably won't apply to this. And so we change that around to be a .NET restore instead of a NuGet restore. And all of that combined, the end solution was use .NET Core 5 and then do a .NET restore instead of doing a NuGet restore, okay? All of that work for those 2 little tweaks, but finding out what the 2 little tweaks were took all that work, and it's not lost work. That's not lost time for 2 reasons. One is I got to do some upgrades to my system. Now, if I had to roll all those back, it still would have been valuable. And the reason why, because of the second reason why it's valuable, and that is I got to learn what doesn't work. And that may sound like nothing. It may sound like, man, I don't care. But it's important because the next time I come across this error, and I will come across this error again, I'm sure of it. It may not be with .NET 5, it may be with .NET 7. Who knows? But there'll be a time when I come across an error similar to this, and I'm going to think about it and go, wait. Let's make sure that we're on the right version of .NET Core. And let's try it again. Because if we change the right version of .NET Core, that may solve the problem. And so, knowing what didn't work and what does work allows me in the future to be quicker about my diagnostic work. Because I may still have to do the same things. I may still have to do the other things as well, but at least I'll switch the order up and check for the version of .NET Core we're using for the build before I check the version of .NET Core that is the projects. Because it worked locally, so that seemed like that was probably a place to go, okay? So I just want to make sure that you are aware this is a normal process. And the more you embrace it, and the more you say, you know what, this is my job. My job is to find these weird bugs and fix them. My job is to track down why things don't work and make them fixed or make them work. Okay, that's my job. And yes, my job is to write cool code too, but whenever you write code, you're also gonna have to fix bugs. That's just how it works. So if you embrace that, if you learn to grow in your investigative process, if you learn to learn from your mistakes and to not hold yourself as liable for problems. Okay, I could beat myself up over, it's stupid, I should have known that. No, I didn't know that. I do now. And going forward, I'm a little better armed when it comes to diagnosing this problem. But this is the first time I've faced it this way. So I learned something new. Cool. Okay, I'm not gonna beat myself up over it. I did it on video in front of thousands of people. That's okay. Okay, I'm okay with that because I am human. I'm a developer who does not know everything. And if you thought you were following a person who knows everything, you're wrong. Okay, and it's okay. So I would encourage you to take that same mindset. None of us are born knowing this stuff. This stuff changes all the time. There's always going to be things that trip you up, that cause problems that might not cause somebody else a problem. But that's okay. Okay? So sorry for a little bit of a tangent. I want to make sure that I really kind of beat this home because it's important to your development as a developer that you embrace these problems, learn how to investigate these problems, learn how to be okay with having problems, and really come out of the other end as a better developer, not as a frustrated and beaten down developer. Okay? Thanks for watching. Thanks for participating. Thanks for following me on this journey through the bugs and the frustration. I can't wait to see you next time on the next step in this process. We're going to have a lot of fun with authentication for sure. I've already kind of done some practice work on that because that's a big one. And I think that there's some really big learning opportunities there. So I look forward to seeing you next time in this TimCo Retail Manager series. Thanks for watching, and I am Tim Corey.